And I'm back with Carolen Hope, author of Regulation from the Inside Out. Last time, Carolyn and I talked about what is self-regulation and what is dysregulation, and how do these things influence our behavior. And today we're going to continue that conversation with just a couple few questions again for Carolyn, so that we don't talk too much. Um, so thank you, Carolyn, again for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Uh, so what are some developmental factors that influence self-regulation?
Developmental factors are pretty important uh, in the ways that they can influence regulation, self-regulation. The first would be just general health and well-being of the young individual, whether they have good nutrition, whether they have stimulation. The second piece would be whether they have attuned caregivers that really are monitoring them, are providing what they need, are providing that sense of safety and connection. But probably the biggest factor would be toxic stress. And toxic stress can play a profound role in damaging the regulation processes in a developing brain. And what happens is that with toxic stress, which is ongoing, chronic, unrelenting stress, the neural pathways, the brain pathways that are really dedicated to carrying stress-related signals are reinforced. Okay, so they're really overused. And what happens is that the development uh, is curtailed in a way, or is really modified in negative ways. And the patterns that should be, say, assisting coping and learning are really not developed because the neural pathways that carry those negative stress-related signals are amplified. So what happens is that there can be long-lasting negative effects, unpredictability, um, poor coping, constant dysregulation. So, where does that come from? Oftentimes, it's a result of family dysfunction. When we think about the ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences, we're really thinking about things like abuse and neglect, separation, family substance abuse, family mental health problems. So those can have long-lasting effects on um, academic success, mental health, and the individual's own substance
Uh, And so that can be kind of become the safety that a person knows. Some of those behaviors and stuff that you just described, that is that stress that because they grow up learning to cope in that stress,
abuse.
then they can start to create that environment if they no longer have that type of stress.
Yeah, part of it is that it's what's known. And so as you use the word safe. And so it's what's known, it's what feels right, it's what is real. And that carries forward through our regulation patterns because that is what we really have learned. And also because the brain has changed. The brain is now those stress related signals. We talk about neurons that fire together, wire together. So the more those stress related signal networks are developed, the less those other positive networks have developed, and the more normal that feels.
Yeah, just as you were explaining that, and I was thinking about it. I wasn't really expecting to go here, but as I've been learning the applied neurology to the emotions of when someone has an awareness point for like, oh, this would be a good emotional time for me to use some of these neuro drills.
Mhm.
It just that reminded me of like how sometimes that safety and we just keep ourselves in this loop and within the cycles of relationships that we have. That's what kind
Absolutely.
of dawned on me as you were explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if we have a mental picture that, oh, I'd like to change in this positive way, it's as if our emotions or the structures that are already in place really don't allow us to do that. They're not, we can't access them in that moment. It
Mhm.
takes a lot of work. Human change is definitely difficult. Mhm.
Well, and accessing it in that moment, that's what makes the applying like a safety neuro drill, like an input
Mhm.
to the body in that moment, which makes it really powerful, is what I'm like personally learning about myself. So
Yes.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Uh, Describe the role that stress is playing in dysregulation, because there's like good stress, there's bad stress.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to talk about stress and how important it is in and how it can play a positive role in our learning and coping. And that is that stress is a natural part of life. For example, for infants, introducing a new food, having a different kind of experience, ex, um, being in different kind of weather, being around new people. Those can be really great things if it's managed in a way that doesn't overwhelm the system of the individual. So we call that good stress or eustress, and that's what helps us to increase our coping. Now, when the demand, the challenges are not being met, and we have no resources for having a positive outcome, our brain begins to stay on high alert. I'm going to call it high alert. In other words, all of those neurons that we talked about in that last question that are dedicated to carrying those stress-related signals, those are amplified, those are easily activated. And so when we are on high alert, it's as if that state becomes a default state for us, so that no matter what's coming toward us, even if it's for another person would be a pleasant event or something pleasant. That's not how our brain perceives it. It's not how it receives it, and it's not how it responds. So that's when we are chronically, we call it hijacked or moving into that dysregulated state, even when we don't want to.
And that's when the stress is extremely detrimental.
Yes, in ongoing ways, because we look at our behavior and we think, gosh, I don't want to behave that way, but I keep doing that same thing. I keep activating in that same way.
So this would be the signs that someone is dysregulated, and what do those signs look like from starting to become dysregulated to being dysregulated?
Okay. And dysregulation looks so different in each of us. It's so individualized. And part of that is become because we can either become hyper aroused or we can also become hypo aroused. And I want to talk about that difference. When we think about being dysregulated, we can move into hyper states like aggression. I'm fighting, I'm fleeing, I'm activating in some way that really doesn't serve me. And some examples might be I'm clenching my fists, or I feel myself tightening up or getting ready to move in some way. For others of us, we may move into hypo arousal states. And what that looks like is I'm shutting down. I'm no longer tracking, or I'm frozen.
Disassociating.
I'm out of my body. Yes, I'm disassociating. So it's really unique. Of course, it's so important for us to know, hey, what are those signs? And to kind of map those and to know, when my face gets hot or when I hear wind rushing in my ear, I know I'm moving towards something. And then that would be the time to use those resources, as you said, like a neuro drill, or do something different, or shift my state in some active way.
it, the neuro drills are something like I'm always trying to explain to people, like this possibility that they can, repattern their nervous system through these drills and this movement. How do you explain that possibility that everybody has, that exists because of how cool neuroplasticity is, right? Like, How do you explain that repatterning of the nervous system to people?
Yeah, it's so amazing that we're living in a time where we know with certainty that we can repattern. We can repattern. There was that negative side of neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is the brain's quality of being able to change its form and function, change its shape, and change what it's capable of doing. And we know with those developmental traumas and insults, that's the dark side or the shadow side of neuroplasticity, where the brain is changed in those negative ways. But we also know through neural imaging and through neuroscience and all of the recent findings that we can change it in positive ways as well. And that's how I describe it. I say, science is telling us, and we can verify that through imaging, that an intervention actually works. We're not just hoping it works. We can actually see it working, say, through imaging. So that's how I talk about it, that we can have a focused attention in an intervention that targets an area, someplace that we want to work on, emotional flexibility or emotional stability or attention or whatever the goal is. And we can now see that, yes, in fact, the intervention using is actually useful. Yeah.
Yeah, I I like how I kind of framed the question in this higher level, and then you brought it back and kind of explained neuroplasticity and some of the things that I didn't hit on. So thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
I the As I'm learning all of the neuro stuff and then seeing the connections of how it applies to our mental states as much as it applies to our physical states,
Mhm.
has just been super fascinating. Uh,
Mhm.
so when it comes to the experiences of movement and mindfulness and the benefits that people get from self-regulation, how do you explain that to people, or what do you share with people, that the habits that you suggest, or how do you talk about that?
Okay. So I think about, well, first of all, we talked about this last time that self-regulation it involves mind-body processes. So that tells me that there are areas that we can impact using the mind-based interventions or activities, and body-based interventions and activities. And so I think that mindfulness and movement are two of the most profound regulation change agents there are. And the first reason, when we look at movement, we know that it is a just the physical activity, whether it's exercise or rhythmic uh, games or dancing. We know that activity affects the brain first before it affects the muscles. It is one of the few empirically based change agents, an evidence-based change agent. And we know that we can't think ourselves out of dysregulation, so we need to go to a different modality, and movement is one of those modalities. And the other thing that I love about movement is that it can either calm us or it can enliven us. So if we are hyper aroused when we're dysregulated, then calming our nervous system would be a great thing to do. But if we're hypo aroused, then activating or enlivening our nervous system would be a good thing to do. So, and movement kind of is able to do either of those things.
I love that. So as you were talking earlier, and I was trying to think, what was I going to talk about? What was I going to talk about? Now it came back to me. But when you're talking about the imaging, so I went from learning about Dr. Amen and the SPECT scans and the imaging of the brain side of things to having the neurology of coaching being explained to me of what's going on in people's brains when they're on personal development, personal growth, and this the repatterning of the brain side of it. And my mentor said to me, well, do you want to give somebody an injection every so often and take a look at their brain? Some people need that. Some people need to see the visual of what's going on and what it looks like. And sometimes that's amazing feedback. He,
Mhm.
totally gives credit to the technology and the benefits of it. And he said, or do you kind of want to watch somebody walk, give them a different type of input, give them a neuro drill, give them a movement pattern. Maybe it's not just in their body of moving their arms or their legs, but in the vision system or their vestibular system,
Mm,
which we always refer to as the higher order systems. Most people are training the systems that are below the neck of
mm,
movement and pattern stuff like that. And that just was really powerful for me. I was like, yeah, I want to be able to see people move and see the change that happens. Like, what do you mean? And that's how
mm,
I found myself in learning about applied neurology and everything like that a few years ago.
uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, so this was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. And I didn't talk about mindfulness. Can I
Oh
still?
yeah, please, please,
Yeah.
please.
Just because that is when we think about self-regulation as a mind-body process, I want to talk about the mind part, and that is that mindfulness exercises, mindful awareness is just a way for us to move back into that receptive space and into our present moment awareness, and that is an important part of staying regulated, is that I'm back in my body, my mind is calm, I'm in this present moment, I can respond rather than react. And we know there's so much research about the benefits of mindfulness that I think that it just should be a part of everybody's everyday practice. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always like the debate in the little circles, right? Is it mindfulness or is it movement? No, is it mindfulness or is it movement? But at the
Okay.
same time, it's like if you don't have the mindfulness aspect awareness piece to it, then there's no consciousness to any other part of it.
Yes.
um
And then there
so
really is a third area, which is I think about as breath and energy. And that would be techniques like yoga, like acupressure, energy medicine techniques. And those techniques also work with that subtle electrical system in our body that I think is also an important area to just to recognize that we can influence that in a positive way.
absolutely. And then the first thing we learn is the proprioception, so all those different sensory inputs, whether it's energetic, vibrational, hot, cold, sharp, dull. It's kind of like helping remap the brain's nervous system, because when the brain knows what things are and it can feel safe what those things are, then people can have the bigger changes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. So thank you today. I appreciate it. And
Uh-huh. Thank you, Joe.
hopefully you'll come back and we can talk some more about some of this fun stuff.
Okay, it's great.
Awesome. Thanks,
Uh-huh.
Karen.
Uh-huh. Bye-bye.
Where can people find you? Like, is there a way for people to contact you if they wanted to reach out and get in touch with you?
Let's see, for example, through regulation from the inside out, my .com is the website for the book. Let's see, also I'm going to be having a YouTube channel, and I'll let you know when that's finished and when that's up and running. Those are two ways. Anything else?
No, when you get that, I'll put those links below too for people. So thank you.
Sounds good. Mhm.
All right.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.